Welcome to Life List, a birding podcast.
Hello. Welcome, everyone. This is Life List, a birding podcast with Alvaro Jaramillo. I am George Armistead. Molly is gallivanting around Colombia today, so it is Al and me, but we have a great guest today, Allison Vilag, who is currently in California and fell in love with visible migration at the age of 8 during her first visit to Michigan's famous Whitefish Point Bird Observatory. Since then, birds have taken Allison around the continent. She's guided in Alaska's Pribilof Islands and in Michigan's Kirtland Warbler habitat, and she spent more than a decade counting migration professionally at sites around Lake Superior and Monterey Bay. Allison is also a writer, and many of her stories come from watching birds and bird migration. When she's not doing things with birds and words, Allison bartends in Traverse City, Michigan. We look forward to hearing more about all of that. Allison, it's great to have you with us today. How are you doing?
I am doing well, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. I just spent the last 11 hours standing out at Point Pino Seawatch in Monterey, so you can see I'm a little bit windburned. The extent of my conversation today before coming and joining this was something like, loons by the stacks at Moss Landing, there's a kitty wake behind the kelp line, so we'll see how coherent I am, and apologies in advance.
Nice. Wow, that sounds like a hell of a way to spend a day.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I want to start by asking if I pronounced your last name correctly, Allison.
It's Vilag.
Okay,
I think
Vilag.
you got it a lot more close than most people do.
All right, good.
Yeah. I'm going to ask him to pronounce my last name so he can.
So I can butcher it.
Get nervous. Yeah, no, it's fine. Hey, so I hear you're not alone. At the watch in Point Pino. Said often you have your friend Tim along there for the ride. And
Yes.
You want to tell us about Tim and how did Tim kind of come into your life? This gorgeous creature.
Tim is beautiful, really beautiful from what I can see.
He is super handsome. He ate a piece of blubber this morning that was about the size of a doormat, and it took him a couple hours to do this.
Atta guy, Tim.
Gosh.
I know. Tim, for those of you who don't know, is I think mostly a Western Gull. His mantle is maybe slightly lighter than some Western Gulls, and he's got a little bit more flecking on his head than some Western Gulls. So who knows? There might be some other genes in there. Large Gulls do, as large Gulls do. But Tim has been my companion for the last 3 years at Point Pino Seawatch. I've been the counter there for the last 4 years. Tim might have been there my first year, but I was learning a lot of things about Seawatch that first year, and it's possible that I didn't notice him. But Tim likes to hang out at my feet. He likes to use me as a windbreak. I think he's really intrigued by me because I talk to him, which I'm sure makes the passersby think I'm a little bit crazier than they would think anyway. But he's incredible. A couple days ago, I watched him eat a sea urchin and a napkin in the same day.
Wow.
He coughs up just the gnarliest pellets and picks the bits out that he wants and eats them again.
Wow.
It's very efficient, Tim, it sounds like.
Yeah. I don't know how I would know this, but he's better at catching snacks than any dog that I've met, and he's a very polite gull. He doesn't ask me for food, but he's always hopeful that I'm not going to be a very tidy eater, and we'll just say his hopes are not unfounded. But yeah, he's been there every day for the last 3 years. I think he spends more time at Seawatch than I do over the course of my season because he's there on my day off too, from what I hear. And I always look forward to going back for the season and hoping that he's there and being delighted that he's there.
That is awesome.
We here in Canada, we have Tim Hortons, the donut place, and the little donut holes are called Timbits. So, gosh, we should ship a bunch of Timbits over to Tim. That would be
give us both diabetes.
Yeah. Exactly. Fast track it.
You're not supposed to eat them. It's for Tim.
All right, fine. Give Tim diabetes.
Yeah, it's like, do birds get diabetes? But It's interesting though that this one gull has this really, I don't want to call it repetitive behavior, but a way of being, and that you can recognize it. And it makes me think of working at gull colonies and how they were different birds that had different personalities. You always would be attacked by the same ones. There'd always be the ones that would never flush. They were the same nest, so you knew it was the same ones. And the idea of personality in birds, and I think we've talked about this before on here, is one of the missing aspects of bird biology, because we always sort of think of these birds as these machines and they all do the same things, and somebody does a behavioral analysis of what's going on using 30, 40 birds without ever taking into account personality. And I think it's interesting that your observations of Tim might be much more significant than most people would give him credit for. Particularly when you said like that he coughed up the pellets and re-ate bits of the pellet. I'm like, I've never heard of that. It's like, who knows? Maybe you even have, publication that you co-write with Tim,
I will
I know,
say
it's
that
really
I've
neat.
learned a lot about galls and gall behavior and come to love galls and gall behavior a lot more from watching Tim every day for the last 3 years. Like, Tim's pretty smart.
Yeah. Cool.
Smart, resourceful birds.
Yep.
You said this, was it a sea urchin in a napkin?
Sea urchin in a napkin, like
Nice.
balanced diet. If a gall had a food pyramid, it might be shaped like a trash can, but that's Tim.
Yeah. Or a trash truck. I mean, that was a great story from a few years ago. That the one
Oh
that
man,
rode
that
the
made me
truck.
laugh so hard about the gall that was like riding the trash truck quite a bit inland, right?
Yeah. That's all the way to Sacramento or something.
It was
Yeah,
hours,
it's my
right?
spirit animal right there.
Yeah. No, it's dedication to and commitment to their craft that I think is so amazing about gulls. I don't know why people don't like gulls. Really is sort of an odd thing, But
I mean, I think there's like, it's sort of the same, I feel like, with blue jays and crows. It's almost because people can tell that they're smart. I think it's like there's like a craftiness that people pick up on, that they're smart. You got to watch out for those things, And I feel like I forget what the longevity record is among large gulls. I know it's over 30 years, right? But it could be that Tim is like, 32 years old or something, and he's learned a few things, and he's got a good gig right now, it seems like.
He does for the 6 weeks I'm out anyway.
Have you ever been there at another time, and do you know if he's like, does he like kind of stake that out for a couple months out of the year and then move elsewhere, or do you think he's pretty much there?
I have no idea. I have asked Brian Sullivan after I've left for the season, like, hey, is Tim still there? But I feel like that line of questioning only goes into the winter. So it would be great to find out if Tim's there in the summer. There's some birding events throughout the year at Point Pinos, some flight events that I haven't seen yet that I'd like to see. So maybe that would be another good reason to come back and see those out of the seawatch season, to see what Tim's up to.
Yeah.
So tell us about the season. When does the season begin? What months does it span? How long are you there for?
Yeah, so Point Pinos Seawatch is in its 10th year of data collection right now, and it starts on November 1st every year and runs until December 15th. There was one year when Carl Barden was a counter, and they started it 2 weeks early, so catching the last little bit of October because they were curious if they would see more of the surf scoter flight then. Surf scoters are one of the two primary focal species at Point Pinos, and I think that they did not catch a substantial amount of surf scoters during those 2 weeks. So it's just November 1st to December 15th. And I love this count, but I am also glad that it doesn't go longer than it does because I think that it would break me.
Too many birds?
Yeah.
There's so many birds and the days are really long. It's first light to last light, which I love because we're catching all of the migration that we can see. We're not trying to fit migration into, a convenient 8-hour window, which has happened at some of the places where I've counted. But those days are grueling. There's a lot of salt spray that gets in your eyes, and I'm from the Great Lakes. We're used to cold, we're used to wet, but the type of damp in Monterey Bay just sort of sets into my bones in a way that I haven't experienced in the Great Lakes. And I know that when the 6 weeks are up, I'm always sorry to leave this place that's become a home for me for those 6 weeks, but I'm glad to not be spending, long hours of looking and dawn to dusk damp.
Yeah, long
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering about. Well, one thing you said that was sort of topical to my needs as a lake watcher was that I'm seeing this weather in a couple of days coming in with south west winds that would essentially push anything that's moving towards where I am, because I'm on the north shore of Lake Ontario.
hmm
But the winds were kind of hitting in the afternoon more than in the morning. And I sort of thought, like, I don't even know this, but does it matter? Does it matter what time of the day, like, a wind event happens? Or is it depend on where you are? Or what's
I
your
think it
thought on?
really depends on where you are and also what sort of precipitation, if any, is attached to this wind event, if it's before, if it's after. I still am figuring out a lot of things about Point Pinos, and every time I feel like, oh yeah, I can predict this flight, it turns out that no, I can't quite predict that flight. Um, One of the interesting things that I've found in the last couple of years is that south winds and rain usually bring storm petrels and boobies here. And
Hmm.
a lot of people in the birding community here kind of shudder at south winds because we really like a good blow from the northwest to bring in a lot of those tube noses and just big migration events, push those birds into the bay. And then because of the geography of the bay, they have to fly out past Point Pinos as they're leaving the bay and going back to the ocean. But I kind of like those south winds because they do
Mhm.
bring some goodies. Um, but yeah, southwest winds on Lake Ontario. I feel like in the Great Lakes, in my experience, there's usually really good flights right before or right after precipitation events.
Mhm.
The wind hasn't had a huge amount of impact as compared to what the pressure is doing and
Oh,
where
wow.
that precipitation is. I
Oh,
always
man, I
had
get
really, really good flights right after a low pressure system before it started rising again.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's helpful. I'm kinda still lost here, right? So I've just, kind of the other day I went and I thought, "Oh, it's gonna be really good," out at the point, and it was like there was nothing, and there were no
Yeah, I
birders,
can't speak to
nobody there too,
southwest
but
winds on
yeah,
Lake Ontario, but southwest winds on Lake Superior in November were usually pretty exciting.
yeah, interesting. Yeah. Um, the other thing, so the count has had some amazing numbers but the two focal species are basically Pacific loons and surf scoters? Is that the
Yes,
two main ones? But
they are.
you you've had just all sorts of oddities, and I also think it's one of the only places that you can kind of regularly see albatross from shore in the
Wow.
US. I mean,
Mhm.
uh, it never happened farther north when I lived in Half Moon Bay. We never saw one from shore, it's like essentially, almost never. But it's kind of a magical spot. It's not it seems like it's special all around. It's not just, people are watching that place and not others, but it is actually unique, right?
Yes, it is. It's just really, really good birds happen to come by there. I don't know what it is. Monterey Bay obviously is a place where a lot of things are coming to feed, so it has that draw. And Point Pinos is just situated in a place where I think a lot of birds are exiting the bay. But the magnitude of the flights there that happen, the diversity of birds, and like you mentioned, specifically birds that we don't expect to see from land in most
Mhm.
places on the North American continent, you can see those at Point Pinos. There was a time earlier this spring, I think it was May, and there's this Monterey WhatsApp birder group, and I never leave it when I'm back in the Great Lakes for the
Mhm.
rest of the year. Sometimes I have to mute it because I get such bad FOMO. And I think this was probably the point in the season where I muted it because they were seeing Hawaiian petrels from shore, and not just seeing
Oof.
Hawaiian petrels from shore, but seeing Hawaiian petrels well from shore.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's wild.
And this season, it's funny. I wanted stormy weather, so the first thing I did when I got here was go to my favorite bar with Fred and Catherine, who are part of the birding community here, and I got a dark and stormy because I was just being kind of cheeky. I was like, I want storms because storms when you're seabirding are good. And so, sure enough, within the first week of the count, we had a really strong system. It was south winds and heavy rain at the point. But if you looked out at the wind map, you could see that the system was like covering a pretty big part of the Pacific Ocean. It was basically from the Gulf of Alaska all the way down to Central California. And you have to do that at Point Pinos. You have to see like not just what the conditions in the immediate vicinity are, but it's fun to pan out on that wind map and sort of imagine the things that could show up. And with this system, I was like, I don't know if I should be looking for frigate birds or I don't know if I should be looking for horned puffins. Like either of these things seem like they could be possible. And what happened was we just got an incredible number of storm petrels. It was late in the season for some of those species too. I, off the top of my head, can't remember how many we had this one day, but I think it was over 30. A lot of ashy, a lot of black, and a couple leeches.
Wow.
And that's just something that you can't expect to see when you're on shore and these birds are at sea at most other places, maybe all other places.
Yeah, that's pretty fantastic. I mean, to give folks an idea, we would do all these pelagic trips on boats. We hardly ever saw a leech's storm petrel. Like maybe if we were lucky, it would show up in October at some point, and maybe one, maybe two. But it's amazing to see them from shore. It's just astounding to me. It's different in the East, I guess, but in the West, at least, it's crazy.
There was one moment during that flight where we were watching a black-footed albatross because, again, Point Pinos, and we're watching this black-footed albatross that's coming fairly close by seawatch standards. And all of a sudden in the foreground with this beautiful albatross arcing over the horizon in the back of our scopes, there's an ashy storm petrel in the foreground. So we're seeing one of the larger tube noses that we have in North America and one of the smaller tube noses together in the same scope view while we are firmly standing on land. And it was an amazing moment that fortunately a lot of people were able to share.
And do you ever get sidetracked too by the whales and other things that are going on? Or do you have to totally all right, I'm on birds. I got to focus, no looking at that, whatever, you might have even see killer whales from there sometimes.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I did actually last week. There was a pod of 7 that did just like this nice, long, slow drive by past the point. It was the closest and the longest lasting look I've ever had of killer whales at Point Pinos. I've seen them all of the seasons that I've been here. And usually it's like on a random scope scan, you'll see like the huge dorsal fin of a male killer whale just randomly appear in your scope, which is awesome in its own way. You're like, wow, like this animal is out there and just super powerful and intimidating even through your scope. But to see them come by super close, that was wonderful. And last year, there was this anchovy event that was happening in Monterey Bay. And there were more humpbacks that fall than any other season that I've experienced out here. And there was one that was like breaching so close to where we were standing that we could actually feel the shockwave of the whale sort of reverberating as it was hitting the water. We could feel that in our feet. So even though birds are the focus, and when there's a really big loon flight happening, for example, I have to remind myself, like, don't look at the whales, stop looking for storm petrels, just count the loons. This is what you're here to do.
Count the loons.
There's so many wonderful things going on here that, especially me being from the Great Lakes, I know every time I go back to Lake Superior, which is in every right its own awesome body of water, I'm still like, where are the whales? For the first few days that I'm looking at Superior after being out here.
Yeah, that is a weird feeling because I have it too here. I was like, I look around and think, oh, maybe a dolphin will pop by, and I was like, oh yeah, they don't.
They don't do that here.
They don't. It's like, it's too
Yeah,
bad.
and conversely, my first season out at Point Pinos, Blake Matheson, who's one of the people that began this count, he was standing out there with me, and I pointed out a group of birds, and I described them as coming in off the lake, and I didn't even notice it. And Blake stops me. He's like, "What did you just call this body of water?" I was like, "Yeah, I just called the Pacific Ocean a lake."
The lake, yeah. Yeah, I think those who've never really been to the Great Lakes or birded the Great Lakes don't realize that they're inland seas, really. They're so
Mhm.
huge that they don't function like a real lake. They function like something other. They're not the ocean, but they're not just a lake either, right? I think that's what I've always
Yeah.
sort of thought. Yeah, it's like, it's like thousands of long-tailed ducks flying by the other day, and I'm like, yeah, this is not a regular lake.
Mm-mm.
It's great. You know,
It's cool.
one of
I
the
wonder
things
if
too
some of
that
those longtails had flown by Whitefish Point further
yeah,
up in their
that'd
journey.
be cool to know. That'd be
Yeah.
cool to know. Like, how do these birds kind of connect the lakes up in the Great Lakes? How do they
Mhm.
move from one to the other, or do they not? Do they stay somewhere? I don't know, and it's all learning to me right
Yeah.
now. So
So a side
yeah.
note, like about that particular flight, there were, I guess it was 2020. It was the COVID year because that was such a weird year to be a counter. And I was at a site that was, I think, like maybe 40 or 50 miles west of Whitefish Point as the long-tailed duck flies. And we were counting there at the same time that Whitefish Point's count was going. And the advantage there was like due north, whereas Whitefish Point, it's got more of an angle to it. Birds are sort of flying southeast there. But where I was standing, it was in Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore, so near Grand Marais, Michigan. And I was standing at a place where you would see the long-tailed duck flocks just like crawling out of the horizon from the north. And some of them would go west and some of them would go east.
Hmm.
And there were other interesting splits that were happening there. Species that I associate more with the Mississippi River, like teal and pintail, for example, those were going to the west and presumably cutting over land to get to, I guess, Lake Michigan, which they could follow down to the bottom and easily
Hmm.
hop over to the Mississippi River. And species that I associate more with the Eastern Great Lakes and even the Atlantic, like a lot of the long-tailed ducks, a lot of the scoters, those were coming straight at me and then moving to the east. So
Oh
you had
wow,
this feeling of standing like maybe this is a place where flyways divide. And it was awesome in that
that's
way.
cool. That's cool. No, it's interesting that something that you would think as basic as that could be still not clearly known. And it's not. And basic sort of saying like, oh, do they go east or do they go west? And I'm seeing some things like that here too, where some birds are going, earlier in the season, general migration, some birds are going west and some birds are going east. And in Lake Ontario, you have this connection kind of to the Mississippi if you go towards Lake Erie, or you have a connection directly to the Atlantic if you go the other
Mhm.
way. And it was like, oh boy, I got to pay attention and make really careful notes over the years to sort of sort through all this. But it's exciting. It's just like one person can be sitting at one place and having ideas that might be novel in a sense, or at least, with a whole bunch of people thinking the same things, we could figure things out. It's kind of cool, you know.
Mhm.
Not, but one of the things I find interesting about the count at Point Pinos is that it is sponsored, paid for by the local Audubon Society, right? It's like Monterey Audubon.
Yeah.
And nobody else that I know of, other bird groups, don't do this kind of thing for the most part. It's usually a bird observatory or a scientific group or a university student, but essentially the bird club said, you know what? We happen to have one of the coolest places on earth for migration. We should be doing something. I think that's kind of amazing that they took the initiative. And I don't, do you know more about the history of that or how it works?
I don't know a whole lot about the history of the Sea-Watch. I know that for quite a while there was like a known strong movement of surf scoters and Pacific loons here, and I think around the time that Brian moved here and started sea watching here, he was like, this needs to be documented. And in my experience, the Monterey Audubon group is just very on board with engaging in that sort of work. They're like, yeah, this is awesome. Let's figure out how to do it and do it right. And I think that for the 10 years that they've run this count, there's been a very, very high standard of counters that have worked here. The data collection has been really good. And they've also been able to use it as a wonderful outreach opportunity because there's so many places where visible migration happens where you don't have the amount of passersby that Point Pinos does. It's like right on a recreation trail on the Monterey Peninsula. There's probably days where we point scoter flocks out to dozens, if not hundreds of people. And it's just incredible to be at a site where you have a gorgeous migration and people that you can point it out to and be like, hey, these birds nest in Alaska and they're on their way south for the winter and they've almost made it to where they're going. And we have 60,000 surf scoters that come through in a season. We have at least 100,000 Pacific loons that come through in a season.
Wow.
Just the magnitude of it. And I've never pointed out a surf scoter flock or a loon flock when they're happening to people passing by and not had them be wowed. It's like they just need somebody to open that world up to them. And I feel like that's a really important part of my work, counting at Point Pinos, and especially for the dedicated outreach effort, is like we are a lens on migration for people who might not know anything about it.
Right.
I'd be curious to hear about some of those two birds in particular, surf scoters and Pacific loons, like about the big days that you've had there. I don't know if folks may not know. I didn't know actually until I was just looking, but there's over 17,000 checklists from this hotspot. And it's the third most of any place in California, and it's in like the top 40 or so in the United States for the number of checklists input. It's and I suspect virtually all of that is since the seawatch, probably Brian put in quite a bit of time before there was dedicated counter. But I mean, that's a lot of birds. That's a lot of hours and a lot of birds counted there. What I cannot have, I heard the other day that Daniel Irons down in Cape May had a flight of 35,000 red-throated loons.
I saw that too.
Yeah, which is like just bonkers. But I can't imagine like seeing 100,000 Pacific loons over 6 weeks. You must have had some pretty special days with them and with surf scoters.
Yes, they are beautiful days, and that is what keeps me coming back to this count. I mean, there's a lot of things, partly how well the Monterey birding community takes care of me and how excited they are about the migration. That's a big part of it. But it is seeing these big surf scoter flights and these big loon flights. That's what brings me back for the last 4 years. So the peak, let me talk a little bit about the different flight lines for both of those species and the sort of the peak days, the peak seasons. The surf scoters are one of the earlier things to peak here, usually like the second or third week of the count. And I think my peak day here ever was 14,000. I had a 12,000 day this season. And we try to count everything individually at Point Pinos, but on those days we've been clicking the scoter flocks by fives because you'll have flocks of several hundred going by. And Point Pinos just has an incredible amount of sky and horizon and water to cover. It's facing north mostly, which is unusual amongst the other places that I've counted. You almost always have good light. It's fantastic. But you're staring north, sort of looking towards Santa Cruz from where you're stood. And the surf scoters have a bunch of different routes that they take. They could be anywhere. A lot of them will wrap around the bay and sort of follow the contours of the bay. So you'll pick up a flock that looks like they're crossing the big smokestacks at Moss Landing. And you'll be like, how long until that flock is going to be at Point Pinos? And sometimes you'll notice like a dabbler with that flock when it's really distant. And you'll be able to use that as a gauge of when the flock actually passes the point. And the migration that passes Point Pinos for the loons and the scoters, one of the flight lines goes right in front of you. It's naked eye is the best way to see it, honestly, for that component of the count. So you've got that flight line that wraps the bay and goes right in front of you. There's also another flight line. There's this red buoy that we use as a landmark. And there's another flight line of scoters that for some reason starts to get more active in the afternoon. We don't see them using it so much in the morning, but this flight line, the scoter flocks will be low. And sometimes it's like there's a wall of scoters coming towards you. You'll just pick up like the orange bills of the males in your scope, and it's like several scope fields wide, this line of scoters, and they're catching the same action that the wave is. So like the whole flock is just like heaving and undulating and pulling apart and clumping together. They move a lot more within their flocks than the other species of scoters, like in particular white-wing that I've counted do. White-wings sort of keep their places, but surf scoters move around a lot, and the amount of motion within these big flocks is just beautiful. And then in the evening, there's a really annoying flight line that is actually behind us, cutting over land. So we have to remember to be checking back there. There's nothing else that flies back there as far as our focal species goes. But we will get sometimes 800 surf scoters using that line in the last hour of the count. And there's not a whole lot that's known for sure about how surf scoters might migrate after dark. I know at Whitefish Point, like I've sat out on the beach watching the stars or the eclipse or whatever, and there's really big night flights there during the spring, and I will hear like white-winged scoters and long-tailed ducks going well into the night, like 2 a.m.
Wow.
I would not surprise me if some of the flocks at Point Pinos are also continuing well into the night. There's a certain feel that birds that are actively migrating and look like they have a ways to go, like, carry with them as they're flying. It's hard to describe. You just, I think, have to watch a lot of migration to get that feeling. I get that feeling from those surf scoters that are going at dusk at Point Pinos. And I read the Birds of the World account, and it looked like there was at least some evidence of overland migration for the species overnight. So I think that they're probably flying into the night. And when I go home at night after these big flights, I'll shut my eyes and I'll still be seeing those surf scoters fly.
It's like Tetris. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a reference for those out there. But yeah, it's interesting what you say, like about, it's almost like Zugenrui. I'm sure you guys have heard of Zugenrui, where it's like they say it's like a caged bird that still has the inclination to migrate and gets very active within its cage. There should be a German word at least for what you're describing, the birds that are actively migrating and just demonstrate by their nature that they still have a ways to go and are going to keep going for a while. That is a really cool concept.
Yeah. Scoter flappen.
Is that German?
Yeah. I might be Swedish.
He's so talented, this guy. I swear, he really is.
Yeah,
you know,
make up crap.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about Monterey Audubon too that we were talking about all this, the history and the count and the birds, but I think some of the people outside who don't know the California Audubons and people and the birding, whatever, they might assume that Monterey Audubon is huge because it's like they might assume because everybody's heard of Monterey Bay as a birding spot. But Monterey Audubon is not a large Audubon society. It's a relatively small one. And here they are doing something that I think is like world class. Like this is to me, I have to point out that you don't have to be a huge organization to do meaningful work. And part of what I think is fantastic is that the organization said, I know early on they were like, should we do this? Should we not? And they're doing it. And not only that, they're really into it. And there's all this volunteer effort. And the folks there are just so nice. I think, great people. So it's been that I think is to be pointed out. Any little organization out there to think, we're too small to do something. You're not too small. You just got to put together the right feel and people and just do what you need to do for your local birds, whatever they might be, right? So that's a shout out to
find what's special
Monterey
about your birding community and celebrate it, uplift it. But yeah, I will say that the Monterey birding community, at least for the people that I brush shoulders with a lot at Seawatch, it's wonderful. I've had people come to our site and like comment on what a welcoming group of birders that we are. And also, like in my experience, there's not a lot of big egos there. There's not a lot of people that are trying to one up other people, which I have experienced with other birding communities.
Mhm.
I love it here. And I think a lot of that is because you have people who are very, very skilled birders, like Brian Sullivan, for example, but will still let themselves just like express awe at a Pacific loon flock going by, even if that's something that you've seen thousands of times. Like you can still express wonder over it. And I think that that standard is sort of the Monterey birding community
Mhm.
has followed. Like we're out there, looking for good birds and hoping to get big numbers. But at the end of the day, we're just out there celebrating and acknowledging and feeling reverence for migration.
Right. I got to say, changing the subject a little bit, but staying on the birds, I think both of you have been Pribilof guides. Have you not? But you have not met each other before. But didn't you both do that job? It's like,
Yeah. Allison was
What
a
years were you
lifer.
there?
Allison was a lifer when we signed on here, so it was a good lifer to Twitch.
yeah.
Yeah, I was there 2002, just for that year, and then I got into full-time guiding that like immediately after that, and have been doing that since. What about you?
Well, I was there in 2015 and 2016. Yeah, I was there the full May to October guiding season in 2015. I was still in college at the time, so basically my professors in 2016 said, you better make it back for fall semester. We can't guarantee when you're going to graduate. And I said, okay, I'll go back. But it was really cool being out there, and I think that a lot of my love for alcids and tube noses and just looking out at the water and watching birds fly by did come from the Pribilofs, even though a lot of people go to the Pribilofs in hopes of getting Siberian vagrants.
Yeah, I agree that like obviously I would say it's kind of jackpot birding as far as the vagrants go, but the real reason to go is for red-legged kittiwake and for ridgewall, and for kittiwake condo off the West Bluffs there to just be in awe of many hundreds or thousands of both blackleg and red-leg kittiwakes, but the views of those alcids along ridgewall is pretty tough to beat.
Absolutely. I think that some of my favorite memories at St. Paul were walking from Southwest Point out to Samana, which is like that little random pond with the building on it on the North Shore. No roads went there. You had to either walk or take a four-wheeler. And I liked doing that walk when the kittiwakes were gathering mud for their nests at that pond at Samana, and then just streaming back over the tundra. I feel like usually the lupins were maybe starting to bloom. There were Lapland longspurs and snow buntings just skylarking, displaying everywhere. And these kittiwakes, a procession of kittiwakes, hundreds if not thousands of them, black-legged and red-legged, carrying mud back to the nesting cliffs.
Always funny when
Cool.
people see those carrying the mud. They're like, it's got a black head. And you're like, no, it doesn't. It looks really weird because it's got a face full of mud that it's carrying around. Yeah. Yeah, it is a magical place. Yeah, I really love St. Paul. I feel like we could talk a lot about that place, but yeah, the wildflowers are also pretty phenomenal up there. I think it's the one place where I ever really where I really fell in love with wildflowers.
Yeah,
it's sad though that now, I mean, the fisheries have collapsed and the town is sort of collapsing, and the people who live there and live there for a long time but have to move out, and there's all this sort of and you'd hope that birding and tourism would take up the slack, but it just hasn't been able to. And it's kind of sad. It's not the same place now, I guess, in many ways, but
yeah, the summer I was out there was over 700 people living there, and the crab industry and the pollock industry were still booming, and the crab industry is pretty much collapsed. The crab fishery is pretty much collapsed, and I think there's less than 300 people living out there now. And
when I was there, I think it was down to 400. So,
oh wow,
Yeah, it's a different story now. And the kids don't stick around. All the kids that are born out there, they head for Anchorage or elsewhere as soon as they can, pretty much.
Yep.
But it is still a phenomenal place to visit. And did you
People
ever
should.
have a Arctic fox get into your house or your car and make a mess? Because they are really good at that.
Yeah, I was given very strong instructions for absolutely not letting that happen. So that didn't happen. But there was a Anchorage area birder actually who would oftentimes just sort of come out on his own. And I think this was after I had left for the second season. But he came out, and there's reindeer that are introduced on that island as a food source for the people who also were brought there as slaves by the Russians. And that's how St. Paul's human history started, was Russian fur traders finding out that the fur seals were there and then taking people that they had enslaved in the Aleutians to go kill seals, essentially. But Brad went and got a reindeer, and he had the meat cooling on the porch, which was a really bad idea. Like, Brad knew way better than this. And
I'm pretty sure I know the same Brad. I think Al knows him as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And apparently the Arctic fox didn't just take like any meat, but it took the back straps. And I think that Brad may have threatened to kill every Arctic fox on the island, and it was a good thing that his flight was leaving that afternoon. But yeah, those things they definitely have a few tricks up their sleeves.
They really do.
Yeah.
I'll never forget pulling into the AC or being parked at the AC store there, having some guy pull his little pickup in, leave his car door open, go running into the AC store like super quickly. Before like 2 seconds, Arctic Fox jumps in the car and then is gone. And then the guy gets back.
Like
and
drove
you see
away
him
with
just,
it? Oh.
No, just like peed basically. And then the guy comes back, and you can see him. He's like, he's like freaking out and cursing and screaming. And I was like, dude, it happened so fast. There's nothing I can do. I'm sorry. It's like, what are you going to do? They're very crafty.
Yeah, there was one time, like the ones out there are small, and I think that they're so inbred that a lot of them have like leg deficiencies, and so they weren't the best at actually catching and killing things. They were more of scavengers, and there were definitely plenty of things to scavenge there. But I remember one afternoon I was guiding a couple of photographers, and there were these tufted puffins that were just having some sort of huge territorial dispute.
That sounds
It might
very
have been
cute.
at Ridge, actually. It wasn't cute. They both fell off the cliff and hit the ground hard. And the Arctic fox just happened to be in the right place at the right time. The photographers happened to be at the right place at the right time, too, and got the whole thing. But It was crazy. The fox just looked like it couldn't believe its luck. And I was like, yeah,
It's
you
like jackpot.
did get lucky. Yep.
Yeah.
We were, before we got together to record, we were looking at the map of Michigan, trying to figure, like, I was like, both George and I were like, neither of us have ever been to Whitefish Point. And we're like, where the hell is it? We're
Yeah.
kind of
It's like a legendary spot,
like,
and we couldn't. Yeah, we
You don't know.
couldn't.
Can't put it on a map.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, it's sort of like, all right, from Sault Ste. Marie, the Sioux, it's like off to the, all right, from there. And then we were looking at the Mackinac Bridge, and we kind of got lost looking through where you said you worked at Traverse City. So that was like, that's well to the south. So do you live up in the Upper Peninsula of the UP, or do you live down, how does it all work? Do you sort of move around throughout when you're in Michigan?
I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm a migratory creature, too, in a lot of ways. My boyfriend lives in Traverse City, and we've lived together there when we're not both away working, because he works away as well. He's been there for a while. I've been there with him for, I think, 6 years now. And so I love the Whitefish Point area so much that I was actually able to get a cabin and some property up there earlier this year. And my eventual goal is to be up there permanently. It probably won't happen for a couple years, 3 years yet. But I do have all 3 species of grouse in Michigan on my yard list already, as well as olive-sided flycatcher. So
nothing wrong with that.
Wow.
No,
Wow.
it's pretty great. I wanted a place that had ravens and winter wrens, and those were my main 2 criteria for any piece of property I was going to get, because I love both those birds. And I knew those would be there. They are.
It's funny, Allison, because it sounds like to me, you're, as you say, self-described migratory creature, but you love stationary counts. And that
Yeah.
takes a special breed. Like one of my buddies here in Philly, like I almost can't get him to go birding unless we're going someplace to just do a stationary count. He's like, no, we go to one spot on the river, we see what flies by, or he's doing a hawk watch at his place, and like that's what he wants to do. He wants to be, he wants to do the census at those places. Conversely, I know a lot of people, they just cannot bird that way, and I can do it for an hour or two, but then I get restless and I need to move around. So I'm curious. Do you enjoy other kinds of birding as well, or are you really you're like I'm a stationary count person more so?
I definitely err towards the side of being more of a stationary count person. I like other types of birding, but I feel like I get very easily distracted, and it's not just birding. It's great, but it's not like I'm focused on birds right now. I'm like, what kind of mushrooms are here? Can I eat them? Oh, the cranberries are ripe. I should probably pick those. That's a cool moth. And oh man, it feels really good to move after, standing in one spot counting migration for 11 hours. So that's usually what my rambles are, that are not stationary birding. I feel like, especially this year at Point Pinos, I work in the service industry. I'm a bartender, and I worked every day from June 1st until Labor Day this year, like literally every day, usually double shifts. The one day that I took off was so that I could officiate my friend's wedding. And when I came out to Point Pinos, as I was like dozing off on the plane, you have like these things that go behind your eyes when you're starting to fall asleep. And I was stocking bottles in our liquor room. And I was just so tired of that. I was like, I need to purge this from my mind. And I was like, I wonder how long until I'm shutting my eyes and seeing birds fly behind them again. And I got out here a couple days before the count started, and I was going to do adult things. But I made the fatal error of the place where I stay is like a basement apartment that Monterey Audubon has a member that very graciously provides the space to me. And you can see the bay from the windows, and I should have sat with my back to those windows because I apparently was going to try to get some work done, but you don't turn your back on the Pacific Ocean, right? So I was looking out the windows and I was seeing surf scoters maybe, and I was like, yeah, forget the work. I'm going to go down to the seawatch. So I did, and I was there for about 3 hours, and I had 3,000 surf scoters. I had a South Polar skua, which was the first one of those I had ever seen at Sea-Watch. I had a Buller's shearwater, a black-footed albatross. It was great. And that night, as I was falling asleep, even though the night before I had been stocking bottles in the liquor room, in my mind, this night I was looking at scoters and murres flying. It was like a factory reset for my brain. And it is just a wonderful gift for me to be able to stay in one place and focus only on migration and just like enter this mental space. It's meditation for me. Just keeping track of movement and cataloging it and acknowledging it and just being in a space where migration is the only world that exists and like the human elements of the world just get diminished. There's literally been times where I've been counting at Point Pinos where there's been like crazy things happening in the parking lot behind me, like construction things, and I've had no idea because I've just been buried in the scope. I'm like, oh wait, when did they close the parking lot off? Like, it's kind of frightening that sort of thing can be going on behind me. I have no idea because I'm just like so keyed into the flight, and I love it. It's just I oftentimes try to do a lot of writing in the winter, and the mental space that I'm afforded through the Sea-Watch really puts me into that mode. Yeah, I like all types of birding, but I feel like the stationary birding and looking with intent and purpose, that for me is great for my mental health, and I don't know, it helps me feel like I can access the version of myself that I like the most.
I've read a lot of things you posted and, done online, and your writing is beautiful. It's like amazing. Like it's evocative and paints pictures in a way that I don't see a lot of birders doing. Like you sort of have a unique voice. Are you, do you have any plans for your writing beyond, what you're doing now in a sense? Because I think you should have plans. Let me tell you. because you're good.
Yeah, thank you so much. It means a lot to have that sort of encouragement. Yes, I do have plans for my writing. My degree is actually in writing, and I
Oh,
don't know, like most people, struggle with discipline in some areas of my life, and I've had this book project that I just haven't buckled down and committed to, and I think a lot of it was trying to find what story I wanted to tell, and this year that story became more clear. A few years ago, I did a sort of big year where I wasn't really focusing on racking up a huge species list. My regulation area was the lower 48, but I was mostly interested in vulnerable bird species and the areas that were significant to them. And I got into a lot of like very
hmm.
off the beaten birding track birding areas and met a lot of wonderful birds, a lot of wonderful people. And though I didn't set out with this in my mind, like I learned a lot about my own vulnerability as a woman alone on the road I was living out of my truck, and just like appreciated that a lot of things that women struggle with are things that are inflicted on us by people that also inflict like things on birds and their habitat. It's just like all a lot
Hmm.
of ownership and control. And that is the book project that I started working on a couple winters ago. I'm going to be working on it a lot more this winter. I feel like this year I just came into myself a lot as a person, and I think I've got what it takes to sit down and finish that first draft of it. But um, I definitely want to write and have a body of work for the migration that I've
Yeah.
experienced at Point Pinos and also at Whitefish Point. And I keep really, really good journals and all of that. I just probably need to stop being so much of a perfectionist is really what it comes down to with my
Yeah.
writing. I'm
Just
like, it's
put
not good
put
enough for
things
the world,
down.
but it is.
Put things down and then fix them up later. I guess it's
Yeah.
like it's
A good editor counts for a lot, They can
Yes.
help.
yeah.
They can help with a lot, seems like.
No, that sounds like a really neat idea. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think as you get older in birding, you realize that you start out, oh, I like birds. Oh, I like lists. I like these very simple aspects of birds, and then the birds take you through this journey where you end up going like, holy crap, the birds change the way you see the world and the way you interact with the world, the natural world, and with people, and how you see people and how you see all sorts of things. And I sometimes sit back and think, wow, like the 14-year-old birder self that I was would never have seen how this whole idea of just being in nature is essentially like a religious almost experience, if I could use that word, in
Mhm.
that it makes you evaluate everything, and and also how you think about the way politics, how you think about people, how you think about everything, and how you think about your own way of being, which sometimes isn't perfect. You're like, and the birds kind of help you through all of it, and kind of get you sort of to see the sort of real meaning of life. If somebody says, "What's the meaning of life?" and I would point to a pigeon and go, "There it is." You now just find it, find it for yourself. Because if you look at that pigeon, you're going to learn a lot, and then you might as well look at a lot of other things out there in nature. And yeah, it's a great idea. It's a fantastic idea to sort of have that correlation of your own experience, birds, and our world as we see it. It's like that's exactly what we need. Yeah, do
Those
it.
stationary counts, too, I think they do make you appreciate time, as much as anything, because you're in the same place the whole time, but you're seeing everything change, and yeah, I just think that gives you a unique perspective on time. Molly and I were actually talking with Josh Coville on another episode we recorded recently about him doing the hawk watch at Jewel Basin in Montana. It's the same idea. It's, you spend weeks at a place where there is seasonality, and yeah, like you appreciate how time unfolds, and I think that gets to the religious part that you're talking about as well, Al. It's like it affects your perception of time and how to spend that time.
Hmm. Yeah, one of the things that you've written about, like that I've sort of really sort of, I've thought about it recently because I've moved from California to the Great Lakes, and suddenly there's like winter and the north and snow. And there's a lot of some of your stuff you've kind of put out over the years, sometimes Facebook posts or whatever. It's like you have this real love of the north in a way that is like encouraging, and like I realize that so many people tell you that it's going to suck to be in winter that you start believing it. And then you go hang out with your friends, like, my friends from Canada, and they're like, oh no, you just like, you do stuff in the winter and you enjoy the winter and you're out there, and it's just another aspect of living. And I thought you've done, I mean, how do you view the North and like kind of living up in a place where a lot of people would say, wow, like, how do you handle it? Like, what's your kind of, you're, having grown up there, what do you say to people who say, oh man, I couldn't live up there, it's too cold?
I would say get yourself a really good pair of down pants and nothing's going to be cold anymore. Um, but yeah, find something that is fun about winter and get out and do it. Like for me, that thing is cross-country skiing. I'm
Hmm.
not great at it. It's a wonderful form of movement. And I think the happiest winter of my adult life was actually 3 winters ago. I rented a cabin on Lake Superior and just went up for a season to write and sort of put together imaginings for that book project that I brought up earlier. And I was so very fortunate to be living across the street from like the one Forest Service road that wasn't part of a snowmobile
Hmm.
trail. And you could go down this Forest Service road for miles on cross-country skis. And when the road ended, you could go across a frozen lake and then just like deep into spruce bogs full of white-winged crossbills that winter. And just be in places that you felt like maybe no person had been for a very long
Hmm.
time. And these are places you wouldn't be able to get into during other times of the year because it would be impassably muddy or the mosquitoes would be horrendous, things like that. And winter allowed you to see more of that. I have a pretty sizable chunk of property that's attached to the cabin that I bought, as well as like
Hmm.
it's surrounded by state land. And I haven't even explored all of my property yet, partly because since I got it, I've just been working a lot, but partly because I was waiting for winter because winter is going to make it a lot easier to explore.
Right. I was doing a tour, and that we got up to northern Norway, and there was like the place where they have the kittiwake hotels, like where they made these little places for kittiwakes. But from our place, we were way up in the north, and in the Arctic at that point. There was this building, and it said, and it was kind of shocking because it said, "Make the North great again." And I'm like, "Oh no, political this." So I look it up, and it was a joke, really. It was trying to get your attention, but it's a movement that Norwegians and Swedes and some other people are doing to sort of talk about the North as a concept of, it's not a place you leave. It's not a place where, people who can't be anywhere else go to, but it's just like, you know, um, the tropics. It's its own wonderful place, or an island, somewhere in the South Pacific, where they were sort of saying, stop giving this lower value than what it needs to be. And I thought it was a really cool thing that they actively were sort of campaigning to sort of, and between different nations, just thinking about the North, and not in a geopolitical, uh, we own this or don't touch the Arctic or whatever. It was more about a mind frame of
Attitude
being
shift.
from the North,
Mhm.
and attitude. I thought that was really cool. So I don't know. Check it out. Maybe I misinterpreted what it said, but first I was shaking my fist at it. It's like, dang, what the hell's going on here? And then I was like, oh no, this is actually kind of a beautiful concept of people who just love where they're from, and they've been, it's and they have kitty hotels. Like, I mean, or
Yeah,
whatever. That's great. That's
it's
amazing.
wonderful. Does it
So
get better than that?
yeah,
Probably not.
I know.
Changing
I
of the
mean,
seasons is nothing to be taken for granted, I would say.
yeah,
Mhm.
that is true. And that was one of the things that I felt like coastal California did not really have true seasons. It was like, okay, it's windy, then it gets foggy, then it gets rainy, then it gets windy, then it gets foggy, then it
It
gets rainy.
sounds
You know,
like
it's like
just a day at Seawatch.
seawatch, yeah,
Four
all
seasons
in
in
one
a day there. Yeah.
Sometimes,
day.
yeah. Not as bad as at Whitefish Point, but yeah, you can have a lot of weather variance. But yeah, it's always weird for me being here at the end of the count when everybody has their Christmas lights out. I'm like, Christmas lights in a place where there's no possibility of snow for Christmas just
Yes, it's
does not
weird.
feel right to me.
Is there any place on Earth that you have kind of thought, oh, I'd love to go and do a stationary count there someday in my life? Any places pops into your mind or?
Yeah, I'd like to go to Utqiagvik and at least see the King Eider flight in the spring and the Ross's Gull flight in the fall. That's something that's always intrigued me. I feel like I haven't put a lot of thought into this lately, but there always is a point in the season where I'm looking at the wind maps, and there's this very inaccessible part of northwestern Vancouver Island, and it seems like the wind is just always hitting there in a way that I feel like sea watching there could be incredible. I might also be life-threatening, but that doesn't necessarily turn me off. But
Little danger, yeah.
yeah.
How would you even get up there? I don't know. I'll have to. Yeah, wow. Yeah, that sounds good.
Yeah.
There's so many places to discover, right?
And that's for me, like, that's what it is. I just love the spectacle of seeing a lot of birds moving at once, moving from a place of diminishing resources towards a place with more abundance. I feel like my own life mimics that as I move from seasons of migration counting to bar work and back again. Like, both of those lives sort of give me something that I need and the other life doesn't. And I think that I am a migratory creature, as I said earlier, and it's one of the reasons that I appreciate watching migration. It just helps me learn more about myself and develop a sense of place that's actually a lot of places.
Awesome.
It is. Yeah, maybe that's a good place to leave off. Because a lot to think about and absorb.
Yeah, I mean, Allison's got to get up in a few hours to go count again.
Yeah, exactly.
I think we're going to have a good flight tomorrow, too. We're coming up on the peak of the Pacific Loon flight. And tonight, I had 100 Pacific Loons in the last hour of the count, which was pretty unusual. We'll get big loon flights. My biggest loon flight, I think, is like 46,000 Pacific Loons in an hour.
Whoa.
Yeah.
In an hour?
Oof.
In an hour. We had a 10,000 hour last Monday. And we haven't hit peak yet for the season. It's usually happens around this point in the season. There's not any weather system that gives me indication that tomorrow's going to be peak or anything, but we had 1,000 hour this morning. I'm expecting at least 1,000 hour tomorrow morning.
I'm guessing
it's a wonderful thing to look forward to.
Oh, yeah.
I'm guessing there's some folks listening that may have never seen a Pacific Loon. So the idea of seeing 1,000, much less many more than that in an hour is bonkers. That's crazy.
Yeah. When we had our first big flight last week, there's like with the Scoters, there's a lot of different loon flight lines. And the light at Point Pinos is so good that you can identify a Pacific loon from a red-throated loon at a very, very long distance. And I was working the outer line, and Catherine and Kai, like members of the birding community here, that I know, Al, you know these people. They were out there with me counting a couple of the other flight lines, because when the flight gets really big at Pinos, it's not possible for one person to humanly cover all of it. And the outer line had been like flocks, and it was like I had to switch my clicker over from 1s to 5s, and these flocks were probably getting 50 birds in them. When we hit peak, we'll have flocks of like a couple hundred loons at least, which is something I've not experienced with loon migration anywhere else. But these sort of scattered large flocks came together, and it was just like this continuous river of loons just like going across the whole field of view. And if you would have panned to the right across the horizon, it would have kept going. And it was just so beautiful that I like yelled out. I was like, I'm gonna start crying. Catherine was like, don't do that, you're gonna fog your lenses. I did, and she was right. But I love the migration, which is like movement, can like move us in that way too.
Yeah,
And
that's
Point
fantastic.
Pinos has a lot of those moments within every season. It's a wonderful place to learn sea watching. Like my field skills have gotten so much better from being out here, and every year that I'm here, I learn new things. The flights are beautiful. It's just like a very welcoming space to. We love teaching people how to do seabird identification in flight. And it's a space where you can make a wrong call and nobody is going to look at you funny for it. And we all do it often. It's just part of the nature of the
Right.
game. So I think it's probably one of the best places to learn those sorts of identifications. And we're out there every day, dawn to dusk.
Yeah.
November 1st, December 15 is the last day. So come on out.
I would say, yeah, well, first of all, thank you. You've given us so much to think about, and even just you painted pictures of things. I think people who are driving in their car or something right now are going to go, "Oh my God, I want to see this." And you can, and you don't have to. You just, you're going to have a vacation to go birding in California. Make time to go to the point, and it's close, easy to get to, free, and then just go and take part. And I think people are going to be like, "Wow, look at this!" It'd be especially if you haven't seen a Pacific loon, you might see a few.
Might see a lot even.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you
Nice.
so much.
Yeah, thank you so
Allison,
much
it's
for
great.
having me. I always love talking about Sea-Watch with anybody who will listen. So
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Allison. And thanks to everybody for listening. We will be back again soon with another episode of Life List, a birding podcast. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.